In the immaculate garden of a mansion, a begging, hungry, and exhausted girl is taken by the millionaire owner under the pretense of receiving help. But instead of compassion, she is buried alive, covered with earth, unable to move, while the man flees into the house. The silence of the garden is broken only by the sound of a white horse watching the scene with attentive eyes. Sensing danger, the animal begins to dig desperately, guided by the instinct to save that innocent life. What happens next, unfortunately, is not as planned and defies everything you believe is possible to save a life. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss out on any of our thrilling stories. Thanks. And now, back to our story. The setting sun cast a golden hue on the high walls of the manor, but the beauty of the moment couldn't mask the hunger gnawing at Helena's insides. The 8-year-old girl dragged her bare feet along the dirt road, her dark eyes scanning every corner for something, anything, to soothe the ache in a stomach that had been empty for 3 days. Her brown hair, tangled and dirty, fell over her gaunt face like a curtain attempting to hide her shame and desperation. The tattered clothes hanging on her frail body told the story of nights spent sleeping in the open, of rains endured without shelter, of a life no child should ever know. Helena paused before the ornate gates of the most imposing estate in the county. Through the wrought iron bars, her eyes widened as she beheld a world that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. The garden stretched out like a perfect green carpet, dotted with colorful flowers that perfumed the late afternoon air. White marble fountains sang their watery tunes, while ancient trees offered generous shade over carved stone benches. But what truly captured her attention were the chickens pecking freely on the immaculate lawn. Fat and healthy, they seemed like small miracles to her starving eyes. Helena felt saliva pool in her mouth as she imagined the taste of a fresh egg, or even a few crumbs the animals might have left behind. The property belonged to Sebastian Thorne, a rancher who had built his fortune on a foundation of ruthlessness and indifference. Known throughout the county for his arrogance, he treated the less fortunate as if they were pests infesting his perfect existence. At 62, he carried a heart hardened by power and money, incapable of seeing humanity in those he considered beneath him. Across the lawn, a white horse with an immaculate coat grazed peacefully. Daybreak, as he was called, possessed a rare intelligence and a sensitivity that always surprised those who knew him. His ears twitched slightly as he noticed the girl's presence at the gate, but he continued to graze, observing her discreetly with his dark, expressive eyes. Helena glanced around, making sure no one was watching. Her small hands trembled as she touched the cold metal of the gate, testing if it was locked. To her surprise, the heavy structure yielded with a soft creak. Her heart hammered, but hunger screamed louder than fear. With the cautious movements of someone who had learned to survive on the streets, Helena slipped through the opening. Each step on the soft grass was a luxury her calloused feet had long forgotten. The scent of the flowers enveloped her like an embrace she hadn't received in months, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to dream that she belonged in this place of beauty and abundance. The chickens approached without fear, accustomed to the peaceful routine of the garden. Helena extended a trembling hand, trying to lure one closer. Her mind quickly calculated, could she possibly grab an egg without being noticed, maybe even snatch one of the smaller birds? It was then that a voice thundered behind her, making her blood run cold. "What do you think you're doing on my property?" Helena turned slowly, her face paling, as she came face to face with the imposing figure of Sebastian Thorne. The tall, heavy-set man watched her with eyes that seemed to pierce. Her soul, his lips twisted in an expression of disgust and restrained fury. The girl tried to speak, but the words caught in her dry throat. Her legs trembled, ready to run, but something in the man's gaze paralyzed her completely. It was as if she had been caught in a spider's web, unable to move as the predator slowly approached. "Little thief," Thorn muttered, his voice laden with a dangerous calm that made Helena realize her situation was far worse than she had imagined. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the frantic beating of Helena's heart. Thorn studied her like a predator assessing its prey, his eyes sweeping over the girl's tattered clothes and famished face. A slow, calculating smile began to form on his lips, but there was something sinister in that expression that should have been comforting. "Well now," he said, his tone shifting completely to something almost fatherly. "Look at you, child. When was the last time you had anything to eat?" Helena blinked, confused by the sudden change. She had expected shouts, threats, perhaps even for him to call the police. Instead, the man seemed genuinely concerned. Her childish voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. 3 days, sir." 3 days, Thorn exclaimed, placing a hand on his chest in a theatrical gesture of shock. "But that's terrible. A child can't go that long without food." He moved closer, extending a hand. Carefully. "What's your name, little one?" "Helena," she murmured, still wary, but feeling a tiny spark of hope ignite in her chest. "Helena. What a pretty name." Thorn smiled, and this time the expression seemed more genuine. "Come, let's sort this out. I can't have a child starving to death on my property." Across the garden, Daybreak lifted his head abruptly. Something in his owner's posture troubled him deeply. The horse had known Thorn for years and could recognize his true intentions behind the masks he wore. His nostrils flared, picking up the scent of fear wafting from the girl, mixed with something darker, a malice that only animals can perceive with such clarity. "Come with me," Thorn said, placing a hand on Helena's thin shoulder. "Let's go. Inside the house, I'm sure we can find something delicious for you to eat." Helena hesitated for a moment. All her street smarts told her to distrust adults who seemed too kind, especially those who lived in mansions like this one. But hunger was a stronger adversary than caution, and the promise of food made her defenses crumble. "Are you really going to give me food, sir?" she asked, her voice filled with a heartbreaking vulnerability. "Of course, my child. I'm not a monster." Thorn laughed, but Daybreak noticed the sound didn't reach the man's eyes. "In fact, how about I prepare something special for you, something you'll never forget?" As they walked along the stone path leading to the mansion, Helena couldn't believe her luck. Maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed. Maybe there were still good people willing to help a lost, hungry child. The house was even more impressive. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings and Persian rugs covered polished marble floors. Expensive paintings adorned the walls, and antique furniture displayed wealth accumulated over decades. To Helena, it was like stepping into a palace. "Impressive, isn't it?" Thorn observed her reaction with satisfaction. "Built it all with hard work and dedication. Every piece here has a story." They passed through the kitchen where Helena glimpsed fresh loaves of bread and colorful fruit on the granite countertop. Her stomach rumbled loudly, making her blush with shame. "Patience, dear," Thorn said, hearing the sound. "First, I need to prepare a suitable place for you, something very special." He led her through a door that opened to the back of the property, where gardening tools were neatly arranged in a shed. Helena began to feel uneasy when he picked up a shovel, but Thorn quickly explained, "I'm going to prepare a little spot just for you in the garden, a place where you can rest while I fix your meal." The explanation sounded plausible, but Daybreak, watching them from a distance, began to grow agitated. His hooves stamped the ground with increasing force, a warning sign the girl couldn't interpret. The metallic sound of the shovel cutting into the earth echoed through the silent garden like a dark omen. Thorn worked with a precision that suggested experience, digging a rectangular hole near a leafy tree, out of sight of the main house. Helena watched, seated on a stone bench, trying to understand why she needed a special spot when there was so much space in the mansion. "Mr. Thorn," she said timidly, "why are you digging? I can just lie on the grass. You don't need to go to all this trouble." He paused for a moment, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. When he turned to her, his eyes glinted with an intensity that made Helena instinctively shrink back. "Ah, my dear child, you don't understand. This is a very special place, a place where you can rest properly and reflect on your choices." The word choices was uttered with a tone that sent a chill down Helena's spine. For the first time since she had entered the property, she began to question if her luck hadn't turned into something very different. Daybreak approached slowly, his hooves making only a whisper on the grass. The horse could feel the tension in the air, thick as morning fog. His animal instincts picked up nuances humans often ignored. The acrid smell of nervous sweat, subtle shifts in body posture, the altered frequency of breathing. Everything about the scene screamed danger. "There!" Thorn announced with exaggerated satisfaction, tossing the shovel aside. "Your special spot is ready. Come see how comfortable it is." Helena rose hesitantly. The hole was about 5 feet long by 2 feet wide, exactly the size of a small child. The dark earth looked like an open mouth waiting to devour her, and a shiver ran down her spine. I don't want to lie in there," she whispered, taking a step back. "I can rest on the bench." Thorn's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, determined expression. His mask of kindness finally fell, revealing the cruelty that had always lurked beneath. "It's not a choice, girl. You trespassed on my property, tried to steal from my animals. You think there are no consequences." "I was just hungry," Helena exclaimed, tears beginning to stream down her thin cheeks. "I wasn't going to hurt anyone." "Hunger doesn't justify theft," Thorn retorted coldly, advancing towards her. "And thieves need to learn about consequences, especially little thieves who think they can take advantage of other people's generosity." Helena tried to run, but her legs, weakened by malnutrition, couldn't carry her far. Thorn caught her easily, gripping her shoulders with unnecessary force. "Please," she begged, "I promise I'll never come back here. Please let me go." "Too late for please," he replied, dragging her back towards the hole. "You need to learn that actions have consequences, and I need to make sure you don't go spreading lies about my hospitality." Daybreak began to stir visibly, pacing in circles and shaking his head. His low whinnies were a lament echoing through the garden, a song of protest against the injustice he was witnessing. "Lie down," Thorn ordered, his voice sharp as a razor. "No, please," Helena sobbed, resisting with all her remaining strength. But the resistance of a malnourished child was little match for the determination of an adult man driven by cruelty. Thorn forced her to lie in the hole, completely ignoring her screams and pleas. "This will teach you not to meddle with what isn't yours," he muttered, beginning to shovel earth over the girl's trembling body. Helena felt the weight of the dirt, covering her legs, then her stomach, slowly rising to her chest. Panic seized her completely when she realized only her head remained uncovered. The earth weighed on Helena's body like a cold, suffocating shroud. Every attempt to move was futile. Her arms were pinned to her sides, her legs immobilized by the weight of the compacted soil. Only her head remained free, gasping for air in the late afternoon that was beginning to cool. "Now," said Thorn, wiping his dirty hands on an embroidered handkerchief, "you'll have time to think about your choices, enough time to understand that you can't just walk onto respectable people's property and try to steal what isn't yours." Helena tried to scream, But her voice came out only as a weak whimper. Hunger, fear, and now the weight of the earth had exhausted her last reserves of energy. Tears rolled down her cheeks, mingling with the dust Thorn had scattered over her. "Please," she whispered in a broken voice, "I'm only 8 years old. I just wanted something to eat." Thorn crouched down, bringing his face close to hers. His eyes were two dark pools of calculated coldness. "Age doesn't matter when it comes to character, girl. You chose to be a thief. Now you'll learn what happens to thieves on my property." He stood up, brushing dirt from his expensive clothes, and walked towards the mansion without a backward glance. Each step he took away sounded like a death sentence to Helena's ears. "Don't. Leave me here," she cried with what little voice she had left. "Please, I promise I'll never steal anything again." But Thorn had already disappeared through the back door, leaving her alone with her despair and the crushing weight of the earth that imprisoned her. As the hours passed, Helena felt her consciousness slipping like sand through her fingers. The hunger that had brought her here now seemed a minor problem compared to the terror of being buried alive. Her childish mind couldn't fully process the cruelty of what was happening. How could an adult do this to a child? Daybreak had not moved away. The horse remained nearby, restless and attentive. His animal instincts urged him to act, but he didn't know how. Every now and then he would approach the spot where Helena was buried, sniffing the air and emitting low sounds of lament. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Helena felt a different kind of cold settle into her bones. It wasn't just the chill of the approaching night, but something deeper, the cold of abandonment, of injustice, of complete loneliness. "Mommy," she murmured, vaguely remembering the woman she had lost years ago. A victim of an illness they had no money to treat. "Mommy, I want to go home." But there was no home to return to. There was no one in the world who cared if she lived or died, except perhaps for that white horse that continued to roam the area like a white-coated angel watching over her agony. As darkness deepened, Helena felt her life force slowly ebbing away. Her eyes, which had cried so much, were now dry. Her breathing had become shallower, more spaced out. The cold from the earth seemed to be spreading from her buried body to her soul. "God," she whispered to the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky, "if you really exist, please don't let me die here alone. Please send someone to help me." Daybreak, as if he had heard her silent prayer, drew even closer. His dark eyes met hers in the gloom, and for a moment, Helena felt she wasn't completely alone. There was a gentle soul there, even if it was just an animal sharing her pain. "You're beautiful," she murmured to the horse, forcing a weak smile. "Thank you for staying with me." Her eyelids began to grow heavy, and Helena fought against the sleep that threatened to take her. She knew instinctively that if she fell asleep now, she might not wake up. The early morning arrived silently, bringing with it a dew that settled gently on Helena's face. She had managed to resist sleep throughout the night, alternating between moments of lucidity and periods of semi-consciousness where her mind wandered through distant memories and fragmented dreams. Daybreak hadn't left her side for a moment. The horse kept his silent vigil, lying down near where the girl was buried, occasionally getting up to sniff the air and check if she was still breathing. His animal instincts told him this child was slowly dying, and something deep within him prevented him from abandoning her. When the first rays of sun began to light up the garden, Helena opened her eyes with difficulty. Her vision was blurred, and she felt as if she were floating between two worlds, that of the living and that of those who had already departed. But the first thing she saw was Daybreak's white muzzle, which had drawn near to check on her. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "I thought I dreamed you." The horse emitted a low, soft sound, almost like a murmur, of comfort. Helena felt a tear trickle down her cheek, not of despair this time, but of gratitude for not being completely alone in her final moments. In the mansion, the day began with its usual routine. Mary Ann Thorne, Sebastian's wife of 25 years, prepared breakfast in the large, well-equipped kitchen. She was a woman of 50, her graying hair always tied in a neat bun, who had learned over the years not to ask questions about her husband's business. But that morning, something bothered her. She had noticed Sebastian returning home the previous night with dirt-caked clothes, which was odd for a man who rarely involved himself in manual labor. Furthermore, Daybreak hadn't returned to the stable, something completely out of character for an animal with such regular habits. "Sebastian," she called when her husband came down for breakfast. "Where's Daybreak? He didn't come back last night." Sebastian barely looked up from the newspaper he was reading. "Must be grazing somewhere. Horses do that sometimes." "But he's never done that before," Mary Ann insisted, feeling a growing unease. "And your clothes were dirty yesterday. What were you doing?" Sebastian's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Since when do you question my activities, Mary Ann? I was tending to the garden, something you'd know if you paid attention to what happens. In your own home." Mary Ann lowered her eyes, accustomed to these sharp rebukes. But the restlessness remained, growing like a seed planted in fertile soil. Meanwhile, in the garden, Helena felt her strength rapidly waning. The sun shining on her face began to heat the earth around her, creating a suffocating warmth that made her breathing even more difficult. Her lips were cracked, and she could no longer produce tears. Her body simply had no more fluids to waste. Daybreak sensed the deteriorating situation. The horse began to pace in circles around the spot where Helena was buried, whinnying softly, as if trying to get someone's attention. But the garden was isolated, and there was no one nearby to hear his pleas. "You're an angel," Helena murmured to the horse, forcing a weak smile. "My mother always said angels appear when we need them most. I think she was right." Daybreak drew even closer, lowering his majestic head until it almost touched the girl's face. Helena could feel the warmth of his breath, sweet and comforting, like a farewell kiss. "Thank you for staying with me," she whispered. "I won't die alone because of you." But Daybreak was not willing to let this child die, not while there was something he could do to prevent it. The second day brought a scorching heat that turned the garden into a furnace. Helena could barely keep her eyes open. Her breathing had become so faint that Daybreak had to get very close to be sure she was still alive. The horse had spent the entire night by her side, getting up only occasionally to drink water from the nearby fountain. Charlie Miller, the estate's gardener for 15 years, arrived for his morning shift, puzzled by Daybreak's absence from the stable. He was a simple man of 45, a father of 3, who had learned to read the subtle changes on the property like an open book. He knew that when animals changed their behavior patterns, there was usually an important reason behind it. Walking through the garden to check the irrigation system, Charlie stopped abruptly when he saw Daybreak near the trees at the back, an area where he normally didn't graze. The horse seemed agitated, pacing in small circles and emitting low sounds of unease. "What is it, boy?" Charlie murmured, approaching cautiously. "Why are you so worked up?" It was then he noticed the disturbed earth, a rectangular area where the grass had been removed and then carefully replaced, but not well enough to fool someone who knew every inch of that garden. Charlie moved closer, his countryman's instincts on high alert. There was something strange about the smell of the place, a mixture of fresh earth and something else he couldn't immediately identify. Daybreak whinnied softly, approaching Charlie and then returning to the spot of disturbed earth, as if trying to communicate something urgent. "Easy, boy," Charlie said, kneeling beside the suspicious area. "What are you trying to tell me?" It was then that he heard it, a sound so faint it could have been mistaken for the wind in the leaves, an almost inaudible moan that made his blood run cold. "My God," he whispered, pressing his ear to the ground. The sound was coming from beneath the earth. With trembling hands, Charlie began to carefully remove the layer of turf that had been replaced. Daybreak drew even closer, as if approving his action. As he dug with his hands, the gardener felt his heart pound. "Helena!" The faint voice emerged from the earth like a ghost. "Please, help." Charlie had never moved so fast in his life. Forgetting any tools, he began to dig with his bare hands, removing the earth with growing desperation. Daybreak watched anxiously, occasionally assisting with his hooves, but careful not to hurt whoever was buried there. "Hang on, child," Charlie said as he dug, tears of anger and compassion streaming down his face. "I'll get you out. Stay with me. Don't give up now." In a few minutes, he had exposed Helena's head and torso. The girl was unconscious, but still breathing faintly. Her skin was as pale as paper, and there were clear signs of severe dehydration. "Who did this to you, little one?" Charlie murmured, as he worked to free her completely. But even before she could answer, his instincts already told him the terrible truth. When he finally managed to pull her completely from the hole, Helena was so weak she could barely open her eyes. Charlie lifted her carefully into his arms, feeling how she was too light, too fragile for a child her age. "Water," she whispered, her voice like crumpled paper. Charlie looked around, quickly weighing his options. Taking the girl to the mansion would be handing her back to whoever had done this to her. He needed to act quickly and secretly. "Daybreak," he said to the horse, "you saved her life. Now I need to get her somewhere safe." The horse seemed to understand, following Charlie as he carried Helena towards the back gate of the property, away from the main house. "Hang in there, little one," Charlie murmured. "You're safe now." Charlie's simple house was only a couple of miles from the mansion, but to him, carrying Helena that distance felt like an eternity. The girl had fainted in his arms, and he feared it might be too late to save her. Daybreak followed them the entire way, staying close like a silent guardian. Rose, Charlie's wife, was hanging clothes in the yard when she saw her husband approaching, with a child in his arms and a white horse beside him. At 42, Rose was known in the community as a woman with a generous heart who had never denied help to anyone in need. "Charlie, what happened?" she cried, rushing towards them. "Someone buried this girl alive in the Thorns garden," Charlie said, his voice thick with indignation and urgency. "She's very weak. We need to care for her, but we can't let anyone know she's here." Rose asked no questions. 20 years of marriage had taught her to trust her husband's judgment, especially when it came to doing what was right. She hurried inside, quickly preparing a makeshift bed in the living room. "Bring warm water and sugar," Charlie instructed as he gently laid Helena on the clean sheets. "And damp cloths. She's dehydrated and might have internal injuries." While Rose tended to Helena, Charlie went outside to talk to Daybreak, who waited. In the yard, as if he knew his presence there was important. "You're smarter than a lot of folks I know," Charlie said, stroking the horse's neck. "You led me to her, didn't you?" Daybreak lowered his head as if in confirmation. Charlie felt there was a special connection between the animal and the girl, something that went beyond mere chance. Inside, Helena slowly began to regain consciousness. Rose had managed to get her to drink a few sips of sugar water, and color was slowly returning to her face. Where am I?" Helena murmured, trying to focus her eyes. "You're safe, my child," Rose said softly, stroking her dirty hair. "My husband found you and brought you here. No one will hurt you now." Helena tried to sit up but was still too weak. "The white horse. He was with me." "Daybreak is right outside," Charlie said, entering the room. "He hasn't left your side for a minute." "Daybreak," Helena repeated the name with a faint smile. "He's my angel." It was then that Charlie made the decision that would change everything. He knew hiding a child wasn't something he could do indefinitely. He also knew Thorn would discover Daybreak's absence and likely start looking for him. But more importantly, he knew what had happened to Helena was a crime that could not go unpunished. "Rose," he said, his voice determined, "I need to go into town. I'm going to see the sheriff." "Charlie, are you sure? If Mr. Thorn finds out it was you—" "I can't pretend I didn't see anything," Charlie interrupted. "This child nearly died. If it weren't for Daybreak, she'd be dead now. I can't live with that." Helena listened in silence, slowly processing what had happened. The memory of the earth covering her body, the despair, the feeling of dying alone. It all came back in painful waves. "He said I was a thief," she whispered. "Said I deserved it because I tried to take a chicken." "Nobody deserves that, child," Rose said firmly. "No matter what you did, you're a child." Charlie knelt beside the makeshift bed. "Helena, do you have the courage to tell the authorities what happened? I know it's scary, but it's the only way to make sure this doesn't happen to another child." "Mukai." Helena looked through the window, where she could see Daybreak grazing peacefully in the yard. The horse raised his head as if sensing her gaze, and for a moment their eyes met. "If Daybreak stays with me," she said finally, "I'll tell them everything." While Helena recovered at Charlie and Rose's house back at the mansion, Sebastian Thorn discovered Daybreak's disappearance. His fury was palpable as he stormed into the office where he usually managed the ranch's business, smashing an antique vase against the wall. "How does a horse just disappear?" he yelled at John Foreman, the ranch manager, a nervous man of 50 who always avoided contradicting his boss. "Mr. Thorn, we've searched the entire property. There's no sign of him anywhere." Thorn walked to the window overlooking the garden, his eyes automatically scanning the area where he had buried Helena. Everything seemed normal. The grass was in place, the flowers continued to bloom. Nothing indicated anything had happened there. "And the staff? Have you questioned all of them?" "Yes, sir. No one saw anything. Charlie said he arrived this morning and the horse was already gone from the stable." The name Charlie made Thorn frown. There was something about the gardener that had always bothered him. A quiet independence, a way of looking at him that suggested judgment. But Charlie had worked on the property for years and had never given any reason for suspicion. "Where is Charlie now?" "Said he needed to take care of personal matters in town, sir. Asked for the day off." Thorn felt a chill run down his spine. Charlie never asked for a day off, especially not without prior notice. A terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. "Go check the garden," he ordered abruptly. "Check if anything is out of place." As John left to carry out the order, Mary Ann Thorn watched her husband from the office doorway. His behavior was increasingly strange, and his anxiety over the missing horse seemed disproportionate. At the county sheriff's office, Charlie waited nervously to speak with Sheriff Mike Ramirez, a man of integrity, 55 years old, who had built his career on honesty and a commitment to justice. When he was finally called in, Charlie felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "Sheriff," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to report a very serious crime." "Sheriff." Ramirez studied him attentively. He had known Charlie for years, a hard-working, honest man, not given to exaggeration or lies. "Go on, Charlie. What happened?" "Sebastian Thorn buried a child alive on his property, an 8-year-old girl." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Sheriff Ramirez leaned forward, his expression growing intense. That's a very serious accusation, Charlie. Are you sure about what you're saying? I found the girl this morning, Sheriff. She was nearly dead. If it weren't for the horse that led me to her, she would have died there. Charlie told the whole story, how Daybreak had guided him to the spot, how he had found Helena buried, how she was now recovering at his home. The sheriff listened in silence, taking careful notes. Where is the girl now? At my house, under my wife's care. She's very weak, but she can talk. And you're sure it was Sebastian Thorne who did this? Charlie hesitated for a moment, then nodded firmly. The earth was fresh, Sheriff. Someone had dug that hole recently, and who else would have access to that part of the garden? Sheriff Ramirez stood up, his decision made. I'm going with you right now. We need to hear the girl's statement and then confront Thorne. Meanwhile, at the mansion, John Foreman returned from the garden with a worried expression. Mr. Thorne, he said hesitantly, there are signs that someone dug in the area near the back trees. The earth is disturbed, and I found this. He held out a small, torn piece of fabric, part of the clothing Helena wore when she was buried. Thorne snatched the fabric from John's hands, his face paling. This means nothing, he said quickly, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. It could be anything. But deep down, he knew his web of lies was beginning to unravel. And if Charlie had found the girl, if she was alive, all the consequences of his actions were about to surface. When Sheriff Ramirez arrived at Charlie's house, Helena was sitting on the porch, watching Daybreak graze peacefully in the yard. Her strength had gradually returned throughout the day, but there was still a fragility in her movements that touched the heart of anyone who saw her. This is Helena, Charlie said softly to the sheriff. Helena, this is Sheriff Ramirez. He needs to hear your story. Helena looked at the uniformed man with a mixture of fear and hope. Her entire life experience had taught her to distrust authority figures, but there was something in the sheriff's gentle expression that reassured her. Don't be afraid, child, Sheriff Ramirez said, kneeling to be at her eye level. I'm here to help you. No one will hurt you again. Rose brought a chair for the sheriff and served sweet tea to Helena, who held the cup with still trembling hands. Can you tell me what happened? The sheriff asked gently. Helena took a deep breath, looking at Daybreak as if drawing strength from the horse. I was very hungry, she began, her voice low but clear. I hadn't eaten for 3 days. I saw the chickens in the big house's garden and I thought maybe I could get an egg. She told the whole story, how she had entered the property, how Thorne had found her, how he had feigned kindness before revealing his true, cruel nature. He dug a hole and forced me to lie in it, she said, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. He threw dirt on top of me until only my head was sticking out. He said I was a thief and deserved it. Sheriff Ramirez wrote carefully, his expression growing darker with every word. How long were you buried? All night and part of the next day. I thought I was going to die, but Daybreak stayed with me. Helena looked at the horse with infinite gratitude. He didn't leave me alone for a minute. And how did you get out? Mr. Charlie found me. Daybreak led him to where I was. Charlie confirmed with a nod, adding details about how the horse had acted strangely, guiding him to the spot where Helena was buried. Helena, the sheriff said carefully, are you sure it was Mr. Sebastian Thorne who did this to you? Did you know him before? I'd never seen him before, Helena replied, but he told me his name when he took me to the garden, said I'd learn what happens to people who mess with Mr. Sebastian Thorne's things. The sheriff closed his notebook. His decision made. Charlie, Rose, can you look after Helena for a few more days? I'll need her to repeat this statement officially, but first I need to confront Thorne. Of course, Sheriff, Rose said firmly. She can stay here as long as necessary. And Daybreak? Helena asked, worried. Can he stay too? The sheriff smiled for the first time since he had arrived. Daybreak is a hero, Helena. Of course he can stay. As the sheriff prepared to leave, Helena called out to him. "Sheriff Ramirez?" "Yes, child." "Mr. Thorne, will he try to hurt Mr. Charlie for helping me?" The question revealed a precocious wisdom, born of suffering and street experience. "Don't worry," the sheriff replied. "Charlie is under my protection now. And so are you." When the sheriff's car disappeared down the dusty road, Helena approached Daybreak, who lowered his head to receive her caresses. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered in his ear. "Now let's make him pay for what he did." At the mansion, Sebastian Thorne waited nervously in the main living room, mentally rehearsing the explanations he would give when the authorities arrived. Because, in the depths of his dark heart, he knew they would. It was only a matter of time. The ornate gate of the mansion creaked as the police car drove through the main entrance. Thorne watched from the office window, his hands trembling slightly, as he adjusted his tie for the third time in 5 minutes. He had spent the last few hours trying to construct a version of events that would exonerate him, but each attempt seemed more fragile than the last. Mary Ann Thorne was in the living room when she heard the engine. A sense of relief mixed with terror washed over her. Finally, she would know the truth about her husband's strange behavior over the past few days. Sheriff Ramirez stepped out of the car, accompanied by 2 deputies, his expression serious and determined. He had known Thorne for years, knew of his influence in the county, but he also knew that justice made no distinction between rich and poor. "Good afternoon," he said as Thorne opened the door, trying to maintain his composure. "I need to speak with you about a very serious matter." "Of course, Sheriff," Thorne replied, forcing a smile. "Come in, please. Can I offer you anything?" "No, thank you. I'm here in an official capacity." Mary Ann approached discreetly, positioning herself where she could hear the conversation. Her heart pounded, sensing that her life was about to change forever. "Sebastian Thorne," the sheriff began formally, "you are being accused of the attempted murder of a minor." The blood drained from Thorne's face like water down a drain. "That's absurd. Who is making these baseless accusations?" "An 8-year-old child named Helena. She claims you buried her alive in your garden after finding her trying to get food." "That's ridiculous," Thorne exploded, but his voice sounded forced. "I've never seen any child on my property." Sheriff Ramirez studied him calmly. "Then how do you explain the disturbed earth in the garden and this piece of fabric that was found buried there?" He showed the fragment of Helena's clothing that John Foreman had discovered. Thorne stared at the fabric as if it were a venomous snake. "Anyone could have buried that there. Maybe a disgruntled employee trying to frame me." "And what about Daybreak? Your horse disappeared the same day the girl was found. Interesting coincidence." Mary Ann Thorne let out a muffled cry from the adjoining room. Now it all made sense. Sebastian's strange behavior, the dirt on his clothes, the horse's disappearance. "Mary Ann," Thorne shouted, "get back to your chores." But she didn't move. Instead, she approached the sheriff. "I knew something was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "Sebastian came home the night before last with dirt on his clothes. When I asked, he said he was tending the garden, but he's never done that before." "Mary Ann, shut up!" Thorne roared, advancing towards his wife. The deputies immediately positioned themselves between them, their hands instinctively moving towards their weapons. "One more threatening word, and you'll be arrested for intimidation," the sheriff warned coldly. Mary Ann continued, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "Daybreak was agitated last night. He wouldn't go back to the stable. It was as if he was protecting something in the garden." "The girl is alive, Sebastian," the sheriff said. "She survived and told us everything. Every detail of what you did. To her." Thorne collapsed heavily into an armchair, his arrogance finally crumbling. "She was a thief," he muttered. She was stealing from my property. She was starving, the sheriff replied with indignation. An 8-year-old child looking for food, and you tried to kill her for it. I wasn't going to let her die. Thorne tried to defend himself weakly. It was just to teach her a lesson. Teach her a lesson? The sheriff's voice rose an octave. You buried her alive. If it weren't for Daybreak guiding Charlie to her, Helena would be dead now. Mary Ann began to cry silently, the reality of the situation finally sinking in completely. The man she had lived with for 25 years was capable of such cruelty. Sebastian. Thorne, the sheriff said, signaling the deputies, you're under arrest. The news of Sebastian Thorne's arrest spread through the rural community like wildfire. In a few days, the entire county knew the story of Helena and Daybreak's silent heroism. What was once whispered in secret was now openly discussed in town, squares, markets, and local churches. At Charlie and Rose's house, Helena began to show real signs of recovery. Her nightmares were less frequent, and she had started to smile when she played with Daybreak in the yard. The horse rarely strayed, far from her, as if he knew his presence was essential for the girl's healing. Would you like to learn how to groom Daybreak? Rose asked one morning, holding a special horsebrush. Helena's eyes lit up. It was the first time in days she had shown enthusiasm for anything. Can I really? Of course, child. He saved your life. I think you too deserve this special moment. As Helena carefully brushed Daybreak's white coat, the horse stood perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of this ritual of trust. It was a touching image that Rose would forever cherish in her heart. At the sheriff's office, Sheriff Ramirez worked tirelessly preparing the case against Thorne. The evidence was solid. Helena's testimony, Charlie's witness account, Thorne's own partial confession, and, crucially, the growing support of the community. Mary Ann Thorne had temporarily moved in with her sister in town, unable to remain in the mansion that now seemed haunted by Helena's silent screams. She had voluntarily sought out the sheriff to provide more details about Sebastian's behavior. Sheriff, she said during her second statement, now that I know the truth, I need to tell you other things. My husband was always cruel to the poor. He fired employees for insignificant reasons, humiliated those who came asking for help. I always pretended not to see, but now I understand I should have done something. Mrs. Thorne, the important thing is that you're doing the right thing now. I want to help Helena in some way. I want something good to come out of this tragedy. News of Mary Ann's gesture reached Charlie and Rose, who decided to take her to meet Helena. The meeting took place in the yard, with Daybreak grazing nearby, as always. Helena, Mary Ann said, kneeling before the girl, I am so sorry for what my husband did to you. There are no excuses for such cruelty. Helena studied her for a long moment, her eyes too mature for her age, assessing the woman's sincerity. Did you know? She asked directly. I didn't know specifically about you, Mary Ann answered honestly, but I knew he wasn't a good man, and for not doing anything about it I am also to blame. But you didn't hurt me, Helena said simply, and now you're trying to help. The child's wisdom deeply touched Mary Ann, who began to cry. Can I do anything for you? Anything at all? Helena looked at Charlie and Rose, then at Daybreak. I want other children not to go through what I went through. I want them to have a safe place to stay when they're hungry or scared. The idea quickly germinated in the minds of everyone present. Charlie knew other families in the area who had informally taken in needy children. Rose had always dreamed of expanding her ability to help the less fortunate. What if we turned the mansion into a shelter? Mary Ann suggested. The property is large, it has enough resources, it could house many children. But what about Mr. Thorne? Helena asked. He'll be in prison for a long time, Sheriff Ramirez said, approaching. The group He had arrived to update everyone on the case's progress. The property might be confiscated as part of the sentence. If it is, I can suggest to the judge that it be designated for social purposes. Daybreak approached Helena as if sensing the importance of the conversation. She stroked his neck, finding strength in the animal's presence. Daybreak can help other children too, she said. He's very good at saving people. The day of the trial arrived, wrapped in a palpable tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the small town. Helena woke before dawn, her small hands trembling as Rose helped her dress in the new dress Marianne Thorne had bought specially for the occasion, a light blue dress that enhanced her eyes and gave her the dignity every child deserves. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Rose asked for the 10th time, stroking Helena's hair, which was now clean and lovingly combed. "I have to," Helena replied, with a determination that surprised everyone. "If I don't tell the truth, he could do this to another child." Outside, Daybreak waited patiently. After much discussion, the judge had allowed the horse to be brought to the courthouse as living evidence of the heroism that had saved Helena. It was unprecedented, but the uniqueness of the case justified exceptional measures. Charlie carried Helena in his arms to the car, as she still hadn't fully regained her strength. Daybreak followed them in a special trailer, his intelligent eyes seeming to comprehend the importance of that day. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from several cities had arrived to cover the case that was moving the entire region. Entire families squeezed onto the benches, many bringing children who looked at Helena with a mixture of admiration and compassion. Sebastian Thorne entered in handcuffs, escorted by 2 police officers. His grey hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled. The man who once radiated arrogance and power now seemed diminished, shrunken by the weight of his crimes. When his eyes met Helena's, she did not look away. For long seconds, predator and victim stared at each other across the silent hall. It was Thorne who lowered his eyes first, unable to bear the accusing purity of that childish gaze. "Would the defense like to make a statement before the testimonies?" asked the judge, a man of 60, known for his wisdom and impartiality. Thorne's lawyer, clearly uncomfortable with the case, stood up. "Your Honor, my client recognizes that his methods were inappropriate, but he never intended to cause permanent harm to the minor. It was a moment of anger that got out of control." An indignant murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel, calling for silence. "The prosecution may call its first witness." The prosecution calls Helena to testify. Helena stood up with Charlie's help, her legs still a bit shaky. Rose accompanied her to the front of the courtroom, where a special chair had been prepared for her. "My child," the judge said gently, "do you know why you are here?" "Yes, sir, to tell the truth about what Mr. Thorne did to me. And you promise to tell only the truth?" "I promise." Helena told her story once more, but this time her voice sounded stronger, more confident. She described the hunger that had led her to the mansion, Thorne's false kindness, the terror of being buried alive, the certainty that she was going to die alone. "And then," she said, her eyes shining, "Daybreak appeared. He stayed with me all night so I wouldn't die alone, and the next day he brought Mr. Charlie to save me. How do you know it was the horse that brought Charlie?" "Because he's very smart. He knew I needed help, and he went to get it." Thorne fidgeted uncomfortably in his chair as the prosecutor began the direct examination. "Helena, is the man who did this to you in this room?" "Yes." "Can you point to him?" Helena raised her small hand and pointed directly at Sebastian Thorne. "It's him, Mr. Sebastian Thorne. And you are absolutely sure?" "I am. I will never forget his face." The most emotional moment came when Daybreak was brought into the courtroom. The horse entered calmly, his hooves echoing on the wooden floor. When he saw Helena, he emitted a low sound of recognition and approached her. "This is Daybreak," Helena said, stroking the horse's neck. "He saved me. He's the bravest hero I know." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even some journalists had to furtively wipe away tears. The silence in the courtroom was so profound, you could hear the collective breath of the people present. The judge studied his notes for long minutes before speaking, the weight of the decision evident in his solemn expression. "Sebastian Thorne," he said finally, his voice echoing through the courtroom walls. "This court has never witnessed a case of such cruelty against a defenseless child. Your actions were not a moment of uncontrolled anger, as your defense claims, but a calculated act of sadism against a minor who was merely seeking to satisfy her hunger." Thorne remained crestfallen, unable to face the judge's words. "The fact that the victim is a vulnerable child makes your crime all the more heinous. Burying a child alive, leaving her to die alone, is an act that offends not only human laws, but also the most basic principles of civility and compassion." Helena held Rose's hand tightly, her eyes fixed on the judge, waiting for the justice she so deserved. For attempted murder of a minor, this court sentences Sebastian Thorne to 15 years in prison. Furthermore, I order the forfeiture of all your assets, which will be designated for the creation of a shelter for vulnerable children. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom, followed by spontaneous applause that the judge made no effort to stop. Thorne was led away by the officers, his legs so shaky they could barely support him. As he passed Helena, he paused for a moment, as if to say something, but she met his gaze with a serenity that left him speechless. There was no anger in her eyes, only a mature sadness for the evil she had encountered in the world. "Helena," the judge called gently, "would you like to say anything?" The girl stood up with Charlie's help, her clear voice cutting through the silence. "I want to thank everyone who helped me. Mr. Charlie, who found me, Mrs. Rose, who took care of me, Mrs. Mary Ann, who had the courage to tell the truth, and especially Daybreak, who never abandoned me." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I want the shelter to help other children like me, children who are hungry, scared, with nowhere to go. And I want them to know that there's always hope, even in the darkest moments." Tears flowed freely down the faces of everyone present. Mary Ann Thorne approached Helena, kneeling beside her. "Helena," she said, "I would like to officially adopt you if you want. I want to be the mother you deserve." The question took Helena by surprise. She looked at Charlie and Rose, who smiled encouragingly. "You will always be my family in my heart," she told the couple. "But if Mrs. Mary Ann wants to adopt me, and if I can still visit you and take care of Daybreak..." "Whenever you want, dear," Rose said, hugging her affectionately. 3 months later, the first children arrived at the shelter that had once been Sebastian Thorne's mansion. The place had been completely renovated, transformed into a welcoming home where at-risk children could find safety, education, and love. Helena, now officially Mary Ann Thorne's daughter, divided her time between her studies, playing with Daybreak, and volunteering at the shelter. She had become a kind of ambassador for the institution, helping other traumatized children find the strength to start over. Charlie was appointed director of the shelter, and Rose became the childcare coordinator. Their experience in taking in Helena had proven they possessed exactly the qualities needed for the job. Daybreak was given a special paddock on the shelter grounds where the children could interact with him under supervision. The horse seemed to understand his new role, showing particular gentleness with the most frightened children, as if he recognized in them the same vulnerability he had seen in Helena. "You saved so much more than my life," Helena whispered in his ear during one of her daily visits. "You saved the lives of all these children too." The garden where she had been buried was transformed into a colorful playground, where children's laughter now echoed where once there had only been cruelty and silence. A year had passed since that terrible day when Helena had arrived starving at the mansion gate. Now, on a golden spring morning, she ran freely through the same garden where she had nearly lost her life. But this time, her laughter echoed alongside 20 other children who had found a new beginning at the Hope's Star shelter. Daybreak galloped beside her, his white coat gleaming in the morning sun like an earthly angel. The horse had become not only the symbol of the shelter, but also a therapeutic presence for all the frightened and traumatized children who arrived. "Helena! Daybreak!" shouted Michael, a 7-year-old boy who had arrived at the shelter the previous month. "Wait for me!" Helena stopped, holding out her hand to help the boy onto Daybreak's back. It was like this every day. She divided her time between her studies, which she now attended at a private school thanks to Mary Ann Thorne's support, and caring for the younger children who arrived at the shelter. "Today we're going to visit Mrs. Rose in the kitchen," Helena said, guiding Daybreak towards the main building. "She promised to teach you how to make cookies." What was once Sebastian Thorne's imposing mansion now breathed life and joy. The walls had been painted in vibrant colors, the rooms transformed into cozy dormitories, and a library created where the former owner's gloomy office once stood. Mary Ann. Thorne watched from the porch, her heart overflowing with gratitude. Adopting Helena had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. The girl had brought light to dark corners of her soul she hadn't even known existed. "Mama." "Mary Ann!" Helena shouted, waving from a distance. The title had emerged naturally, an affectionate term that respected both her new family and her memories of her biological mother. "How was school today, dear?" Mary Ann asked as Helena approached. "I learned about photosynthesis," Helena replied, excitedly. "It's how plants turn sunlight into food. It's like what we do here at the shelter. We turn love into hope." The child's wisdom never ceased to amaze Mary Ann. Helena had developed a unique ability to find positive metaphors to explain the world, perhaps a result of surviving experiences that would have broken less resilient spirits. Charlie approached, carrying gardening tools. He had spent the morning working with a group of teenagers from the shelter, teaching them the value of work and the joy of seeing what you plant with your own hands grow. "The flowers we planted in the memorial garden are starting to bloom," he said, referring to the special flower bed they had created on the exact spot where Helena had been buried. "Helena, would you like to come see them?" Together, they walked to the spot that was now a small sanctuary of beauty and renewal. White roses, chosen in honor of Daybreak, grew vigorously, their petals dancing in the gentle breeze. "It's strange," Helena said, kneeling to gently touch one of the flowers, "to think that something so beautiful can grow from a place that was so scary." "That's what you did, dear," Mary Ann said softly. "You transformed a terrible experience into something that is saving other children." Sheriff Ramirez arrived for his monthly visit to the shelter, a tradition he had maintained since its creation. He liked to personally check on the progress of the institution he had helped bring into existence. "How's our most famous heroine?" he asked, making Helena blush slightly. "I'm not a heroine," she protested. "Daybreak is the hero. I just survived." "Surviving when all seems lost is the purest form of heroism," the sheriff replied. "And turning that survival into help for others is what defines a true hero." As they talked, other children approached, all wanting to join the conversation with the cool sheriff, as they had nicknamed him. "Sheriff," said Carla, a 9-year-old girl, "is it true that Daybreak is a detective horse?" Everyone laughed, but the sheriff answered seriously. "Daybreak is very special. He has a gift for finding people who need help. As if he had heard his name, Daybreak approached the group, allowing the children to pet him. His intelligent eyes seemed to smile as he received all that loving attention. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Helena mounted Daybreak for her favorite evening ride. Together they rode around the entire perimeter of the property, observing the changes each day brought. "Thank you," she whispered in the horse's ear, as she did every night. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Daybreak whinnied softly, and Helena smiled, knowing he understood every word. From the porch where Mary Ann watched her, the Hope Star shelter shone like a beacon in the darkness, proving that even from the darkest experiences, a light can be born, capable of illuminating the path for others still searching for their place in the world. Helena and Daybreak ran free in the garden, where once there was only pain, their silhouettes etched against the infinite sky, eternal symbols that kindness always triumphs over cruelty, and that true love is capable of transforming any destiny.